everybody. We are celebrating the 99th episode of the Feminist Sleeper Cell over and over and over again. It is kind of a special, fun thing. I'm Lizz Winstead. I'm joined by my cohorts, Moji Alawode-El.
Hey.
And Marie Khan.
Hello.
And our 100th episode, which most people would celebrate, falls on Christmas. So we're like, ain't nobody listening to that. So we decided to celebrate our 99th episode in 3 trimesters. So we're going to break up the year in review and celebrating all the fun that is our things with some incredible guests and experts in the areas of the year in all the crappy legislative laws, the year in all the federal regulations and state regulations and garbage, the year in, which we're talking about today, the court system, which a lot of people think is the most important part of the year. And I'm excited because we have Dahlia Lithwick who'll be joining us in a minute, who is the grand poobah of all things court from Slate and from Newsweek, and she's got an amazing podcast. And what do you guys want to know most about? Like, what's got your, like, the year in SCOTUS, you're like, ah.
You know, the year in SCOTUS, oh my gosh, I feel like, as a non-lawyer, it's always a little tough to understand what's going on in courts, right? Like sometimes we'll even like look at a brief or a decision and I'm like, oh, I have to like wade through this, literally swim through these words to like get to the meaning. And it's not written away for like a normie layman like me to understand. So I always find I need people like Dahlia to interpret what happened. And so it's really exciting to hear her just talk about interpretations of things that I may not have fully understood the ramifications of, or like, you know, why it matters.
And I'm excited to have Dahlia on for the interpretation piece. And also because not only is she a lawyer, a professor, but she puts this in layperson's terms. And anyone who's familiar with her writing knows that she really cares about the individual at the end of the verdict, whatever that might be. So I'm excited to hear her interpretation and also have her tell us as individuals, and hopefully our listeners and viewers as well, how folks that are in this coalition, folks that are interested can see, hey, this legal realm is super impactful. How do I inform myself? How do I understand? Because we can influence Supreme Court judge picks, but how can we do that? How can we be impactful as individuals and affect the Supreme Court?
And she's totally going to lay that out for us. And I feel really excited because she is somebody who, anybody who's a nerd, like, and just like an expert, is going to bring us, like, they know all the cases. There's cases that we didn't get to see or pay a lot of attention to this time around. And also, it's really important that during COVID, everything got buried, right? And some of the most important decisions around birth control and abortion happened in the lower courts and Supreme Court, and she's going to cover it for us. So I feel super stoked to have this incredible episode and this incredible human to give us sort of the overview of the year in the courts. So without further ado, let's bring her on. She is the senior court reporter for Slate magazine. She used to be at Newsweek. She is the bomb on the courts. So please welcome the one and only Dahlia Lithwick. Dahlia, it's always great to talk to you.
It is always great to talk to you. And I think you're the last real human I saw before COVID. I saw you right before everything locked down. So you have tripled in stature in my mind and heart because you're the last real human I saw before COVID.
Well, I think it's so interesting that, you know, one of the biggest things that happened in this sort of year in the courts that we're talking about with you, I had left DC and come to talk to you, and we're going to get to that in a hot second, because everyone, we really want your take on, you know, the passing of RBG and Amy Coney Barrett and all that stuff. But for us in our organization, we spend so much time on the ground, helping activists on the ground and helping them fight these laws that are coming out of these state legislatures. And as we all know, these are the laws that eventually end up at the Supreme Court. But we also know that in the past 4 years, and especially this year, that the lower courts have been stacked so profoundly that we used to be able to say the Fifth Circuit is the most conservative court in the land. and say that with kind of authority. Can you talk a little bit to our listeners who are super smart but don't drill down on what the ramifications are of this packing of the lower courts?
Well, I would start just where you started, Liz, and also with the sort of note of gratitude for what you do and where you start, because I think you have precisely defined the problem, which is and I say we sort of recklessly, I don't mean we and I don't mean your listeners, but I just think as a culture, we look at this top down. We completely calibrate the conversation about reproductive rights in this really myopic fashion where we look only at the Supreme Court and we look only at the one big abortion case every 5 years, as though everything else that happens is just wallpaper. And so one of the reasons that I love what you do is that you start in the other direction. And, I think make the point all the time when we talk that change, it starts there. And if you get yourself in a mindset where you think the only thing that matters is the decision in Whole Women's Health or June Medical, then you have missed 95% of the play, because the play is not happening necessarily. I mean, it's not to say those things don't have huge consequences, and we'll talk about them. But you're exactly right that in much the same way that Donald Trump can lose 50 consecutive lawsuits and still say he won the election, you can win June Medical and still lose everything else. And I really think that that's one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you, is that I think we make the mistake of saying, oh, we won Whole Women's Health, then we won June Medical. I guess we'll just hit screen save and, think about this when the next big case comes along, and that will be too late.
Well, and that's why, I'm sorry, that's why I wanted to ask you specifically, a lot of the cases that we see ending up in the courts end up there because of these traditionally stacked courts. But now I would love for you to give some insight to talk a little bit about how some of the makeup of courts that we lower courts that we kind of looked at as possible safe havens, possible places that cases could come through, that have been upended because of what Trump has done to the lower courts.
Okay, so which is your very, very polite way of saying answer the first question I asked you, which I'm now going to do, which is that I think we forget that the Supreme Court takes about 70 some cases a year, and that everything else, right, 99 point everything else gets decided in the lower district courts and the lower circuit courts. So as I said, all of the action is happening there. And in addition to that, what's happening in the state houses, which we pay no attention to, and state Supreme Courts, which we pay no attention to. So there's a lot of stuff that is happening in the lower federal courts. And as you said, this year, Donald Trump broke every single land speed record in terms of appointing people, not just to the federal district courts, which is, the trial courts that hear these cases, but the federal circuit courts. So as you said, we used to be able to say, oh, it's just the Fifth Circuit, everything else is okay. 2 circuits have flipped entirely, in other words, become a Trump majority. And circuits that we used to say, okay, this is a pretty sane, safe court, have become, it's now a crapshoot. You may get 2 Trump judges on, the Fourth Circuit. You may get 3 Trump judges on the Ninth Circuit. So I think that we have utterly lost for a generation, right? These are Article 3 lifetime appointments. If you have some notion that these people can be impeached just because you don't like them, well, that's wrong. They're there forever. They're going to, and we should probably say, because I think it's part of your question, overwhelmingly white, overwhelmingly male, overwhelmingly young. I mean, significantly younger than judges that Obama had appointed. And so in every single one of those metrics at the lower courts, which will decide the bulk of these cases going forward, we have young white men, often with no judicial experience. Some of these guys have never tried a case. We're seeing people come onto the courts who've never stepped foot in a courtroom to litigate. And these guys are going to be in their 30s and 40s. They're going to be around for 50 years. So it's a sea change, Liz. There's no, the scope of it and the length for which we will live under the dead hand of this Trump administration is almost beyond what I can explain. And so that's a very long-winded way of me saying that it looks as though John Roberts is holding up Roe and Casey in Whole Women's Health. What he is in fact doing is eviscerating the core of what Whole Women's Health allowed. And he is giving a green light to any state that doesn't do the batshit thing, pardon my language, that Louisiana did, which is we're going to do exactly the same law that was struck down 4 years ago and hope that the court is different and you're going to strike it down. That's insane. But anything that's fractionally different, if the state puts forth some rationale that looks like it's lashed to women's health, that's going to pass. And so it's not like a resounding victory for women's health. It definitely puts us back in the Casey days, not the Whole Women's Health, kind of takes the teeth out of the test. And maybe the last thing I will say is that already we've seen district courts who want to uphold abortion regulations citing Whole Women's Health, citing June Medical to say, see, June Medical overruled Whole Women's Health and we're back to Casey. So they're using it exactly, reading the smoke signals that John Roberts was sending. And I think it's another one of those head fake things where we're all like spiking the football and saying this is a huge win for reproductive choice, where it was a shell game. And we kind of got sucker punched into thinking like, hey, John Roberts, he's on the side of abortion now. He must have really had a change of heart in 4 years. No, he just crafted an opinion that allows you to do it in a different way.
I really appreciated that you mentioned that the Supreme Court hears 70 cases in a year, because it shows that we need to be watching all of those, looking at the content that's being assessed and being chosen to come forward, and B, paying attention to the outcomes. I was hoping we could talk a little bit about other cases that have had really big implications this last year, but got barely any national attention. Cases like Little Sisters of the Poor that ended up expanding the ability for an employer to object to covering contraception, which is huge for folks in a variety of employed capacities across the U.S. and in allowing or in saying what an employer is able to do. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that and other cases like that the Supreme Court's seen that people have just ignored, that the mainstream media has ignored.
So I'm very glad you asked that, Marie, because I think one of my things that made me crazy this year was that there were women, in line for days around the block for June Medical, and you could have heard a pin drop when Little Sister, and admittedly, Little Sisters was argued, the argument happened in COVID, but we had the same thing a few years ago when Little Sisters, the first iteration of Little Sisters was argued, and it was like, didn't register as something that was important. And I think it goes to this question of how the media kind of constructs a narrative that this is the big deal case, right? This is the one everyone should watch, and forgets that there are other cases that might have huge implications for millions and millions of women, and we don't treat it like it's a big deal, and then it kind of falls under the radar. So Little Sisters is a follow-on case to the first go-round of Little Sisters, and that in some sense is a follow-on to Hobby Lobby, which is the case that first constructed this completely fanciful notion that corporations can have religious liberty rights and that corporations can have like religious dignity that is offended, right? This is Hobby Lobby and Conestoga cabinets that don't want their employees to be able to benefit from the Obama contraception mandate that said that employers have to give the full package of preventative health care to their employees, and that contraception is part of that. And in Hobby Lobby, we had these two companies, for-profit corporations, saying, we don't want to because these are abortions, and we can tell them till we're blue in the face that Ella and Plan B are not abortifacients, but that's what the court determined. And in that case, they really set up a question about what was going to happen to not to corporations, but an exemption that was given to a whole bunch of charitable entities and Catholic universities and hospitals that also were going to make these conscience claims, right? And as you may recall, the Obama administration constructed a workaround where they said, that's fine, Little Sisters of the Poor, you don't have to give these abortion causing, contraceptives to your workers. Just check this box saying we want to be exempted. And even that couldn't be allowed because the claim was made that even the act of checking a box and having it go, back to the government and somebody else then finances the abortion, even that triggers an abortion, right? That was the argument. So the workaround sort of fails, it fails again, and now the case comes back again to the court where the Little Sisters, which is an order of nuns who to their credit do extraordinary good work, particularly in COVID, are saying we still don't want any of our employees to get the benefits of the contraception mandate, and none of your workarounds work for us. And we had two different federal courts that, and by the way, the Little Sisters are not even in the case, like this doesn't affect them. They've been grandfathered out at this point, but they're still the name of the case. And this case goes to the Supreme Court. And as you implied, the court rules in favor of the Little Sisters and concedes right there in their briefing and in the argument that this is going to have huge implications for tens and thousands of women who are not going to be able to access affordable contraception, but oh well, shruggy emoji, good luck next time. And so I think, I think that the heart of your question is, and Justice Ginsburg wrote a really scorching dissent. This was one of her last dissents before she died in this case, essentially pointing out how invisible these women employees were to the court, that the court didn't even factor in the harm to these third parties. They don't have a religious objection. They just want their contraceptive care, which they have a statutory right to, and they're gone. They just drop out of the case. There's no harm recognized. And so for me, in one sense, it's a really fitting coda to all of Justice Ginsburg's life work, right? Trying to make women visible to the court that doesn't see them. But also just, I think, a real lesson in how the Supreme Court kind of identifies the problem into oblivion. There's no real harm here. These women aren't real. There's no real issue. Okay, so tens and thousands of women. I feel like the number was 140,000 women that are going to just lose access to contraception, affordable contraception, and they're not even in the opinion. And so I think it's another example of kind of the great disappearing mass of real women with real bodies and real urgent reproductive needs, and how that doesn't even figure for a court that's incredibly worried about the conscience claims of religious employers who choose, by the way, to be religious employers, and those third parties are just invisible.
Well, is this the case too, where we expanded out of religion and into just morality?
All of these religion cases are so hard, Liz. I mean, this year, the court has just heard, we don't have an opinion yet on these questions of whether foster care organizations in Pennsylvania that will not have, contracts with same-sex parents because they have a religious objection to same-sex parents and they don't want to have those contracts or place kids there. I mean, it's, you can call it morality, you can call it sort of religious liberty. The court calls everything religious liberty. All these COVID cases now about, that the Archdiocese of New York is styled as a religious liberty case instead of being styled as just a basic police powers in a pandemic case, which is the other way to think about these cases. And I think you've hit on something that, when I look for the breadcrumbs of what to worry about in the coming years, it's the massive expansion of religious liberty claims. It's not going to be just the cake baker, just the photographer who doesn't want to photograph a same-sex wedding. It's not just the Little Sisters. It's not just these, Catholic foster care entities that they want to receive taxpayer money. They want to be in the business of placing children in foster care. They don't want to be responsible for any of the outcomes or the violations of civil rights laws that come with that. And so I think, in some sense, you're exactly right to define it as a kind of religious liberty escape hatch that gets you out of all morality and out of all civil rights. I mean, it's these are the same exact arguments that restaurants used to make about serving African Americans. These were religious liberty claims. When the anti-miscegenation law in Virginia was struck down, when Brown v. Board was decided, the arguments that were being made, by the way, even in the printed doctrine in the district court, were these religious liberty arguments about God wanted, Black people to be with Black people and the yellow people. I mean, literally, that's what the court wrote. So I think that we forget that religious liberty has this baked in pretty sort of revanchist and dangerous and retrogressive worldview, and to keep putting a thumb on the scale for religious liberty and saying like, oh, well, we just want people to be free to honor their faith. And if that means they can get out from under all of the civil rights laws that we've worked so hard to craft to protect people, then we have to do that because religion. And I think we're going to see more and more, last year, the court gave a huge win to LGBTQ workers, under really the biggest win they could get, and then turned around at the end of the term and said, but religious schools can be exempted from that under this thing called the ministerial exemption. So I think you're going to see this trend in a huge way, where the court giveth and the court taketh away, and they're going to giveth and say, oh, look, we're going to help protect all these civil rights laws. And in the other hand, they're going to just keep expanding these religious conscience objections. And it's chilling. And I think you have 6 votes for that now.
Well, and I feel too, in that ministerial case, for me, like, I, for some reason, latched onto that one, and hearing that the court, if I understood it correctly, the court decided that no matter what kind of a teacher you are at a school that had a value of religion, you are part of that and have to adhere to those rules. So if you're an art teacher and you don't teach religion, they've decided that you are part of their ministry no matter what. And that was so, to me, that just like gave license to every asshat that doesn't want to wear a mask, everybody who claims their own, and that's why I said morality, because their own right to who they are, they know they don't go to church, but they just want to figure out a way to have their bigotry and the way they want to have their segregated life lived is by citing all this kind of garbage.
Well, that's why I when I was answering Marie about the Little Sisters, why I keep harping on these third parties, right? Because the impact is not on the school that claims religious liberty. The impact is not on the archdiocese that says we want to be able to pack, hundreds of people into the church and sing loudly and say that it's an affront to us that you don't see this as more important than going to a bike shop, right? Which is the analogy they're making in the case last month. And the point is, it's not just about you, right? You not wearing a mask and singing loudly in church and then going to the ER has implications for other people. And you not being allowed to get basic contraceptive care because the Little Sisters have a religious liberty right is actually about you and your life and your reproductive freedom. And so in a deep way, these cases are unsettling, not just because they privilege, as you're saying, the morality claims or the, I need to self-actualize my entire religious self claims over, those that are not, but also because they kind of paint out of existence the interests of the third parties who are harmed by those. And so again, whether it's women in Hobby Lobby or women in Little Sisters, or the people who then have to deal with the fact that there are religious liberty claims now that shore up the need to wear no mask, third parties are suffering and they're gone. They're just written out of the doctrine. And that's the piece of it that is like, you are certainly entitled under the First Amendment religion clauses to, be free to have your religious life and to not have the state tell you what to do. But it has always been the case that if you're harming people, if third parties are being harmed, that gets written into the calculus, and that's what's dropped out. And it's chilling. And by the way, it almost isn't worth saying, but I'm going to say it. The people who win are not the Muslim imams. Like, they are not, the flying spaghetti monster church, and they are not, the satanic, I can't remember the name of the satanic church. Like, it's always majority groups, not the vulnerable minority religious groups that one would think would get that same treatment.
I feel like judicial stuff is so obtuse, but I know this is not something we plan to, but like, what can a normal person do about that, right? As like a non-lawyer, I'm just really interested in knowing like what a normal person who just can do, right? Like, these judicial appointments are federal or sometimes by governors, but like, as a person who's just like living my life, what can we do?
I'm so glad you asked that. I'm so glad. So one thing is we have to care. Like, we just have to give a shit. And we can't be like, oh, well, 300, federal judicial lifetime appointments, and we don't care. And I think this was the thing that was really brought home to me during the whole Merrick Garland saga, where, I saw this as not just like a breaking of norms, but a shattering of the entire, process. And we did nothing. And not only did we do nothing, but you'll probably remember a lot of Senate Democrats ran for office without ever mentioning it that fall. Might be worth saying that a seat has been stolen. And so I think it's a huge part of it is awareness. And even though it's boring, and trust me, because I cover these nominations, like the 17th completely unqualified 32-year-old blogger who got a lifetime appointment, like, it's boring, but like, we don't care. And so I think that part of it is the asymmetry, right? The enthusiasm gap between one party that has spent 40 years saying we're going to steal the courts, and another party who's like, here, go ahead, steal it. Why don't you steal? Here, take this one too. So I think part of that is the problem. Another part of it is, and this is I think where we started, right? This is happening in your state legislatures. This is happening with this like Koch brothers model legislation and the, pro-life group model legislation, that this is not just the courts. This is stuff we have to be aware of at the most local levels. Our state Supreme Courts that are elected, we have to vote, and we don't, right? So a lot of this is just being mindful, like, all the way down the line, and not just getting energized around Amy Coney Barrett, because by the time that's your issue, you've lost everything else. And then I think, and this is going to sound cynical, but I think it's really important, especially at a moment like this, when we are like, there is nothing Biden is going to be able to do to pack the courts. I think even if the Senate flips in Georgia, I think Biden has made it pretty clear that he is not going to do court packing. He is not going to do big structural court reform. We can certainly have a conversation about term limits. We can have a conversation about, jurisdiction stripping, other ways to get the courts less out of, our face. But I think for the foreseeable future, we're stuck with these courts. And if that's true, then I think the power we do have, and that you do have as a layperson, is to let the courts know we're watching. Because I think that there's a reason John Roberts voted with the liberals in June Medical and completely flipped on his vote in Whole Women's Health. And it's because he cares about what the public thinks. And we forget, and this is right there in the Federalist Papers, right? This is the court has neither the power of the purse nor the sword. The one power they have is our public authority and our public conferring of authority to them. And John Roberts, like I promise you this, goes to bed at night, flosses his teeth, and he's like, my God, I hope the people still believe in the courts tomorrow. And that's one of the reasons you're seeing all these election lawsuits coming out against Trump. It's one of the reasons that John Roberts flipped his vote in the Title VII case, flipped his vote, time and time again in the census case, because I think that the courts are more mindful than we think that we have a short fuse, and that the only thing that keeps Americans from going out in the street after Bush v. Gore is the courts being responsive to us. And so I think the worst thing we can do, I know this sounds so fanciful, but it is true, is to just say either, oh, well, there's nothing to be done, Trump has stolen the courts for a generation, I guess there's nothing we can do, and to stop focusing on it, or really hold them to it, write the letters to the editor, write the op-eds, organize, protest, make it really, really clear to the courts that you're watching. And I'm not saying that in a menacing, stalk them way, but I am saying the gift we give them if we check out is that there is no accountability. And I think that if we check in and if we say, I am watching exactly what you are doing in all of these cases where somehow, the life of the mother has dropped out of the equation, or, rape and incest have dropped out of the, like, I'm watching. And that seems like it's a desperately asymmetrical power, but it's not nothing. And I think we have to deploy it.
And I would just say too, and then Marie, I want you to take over, but Americans United for Life is an organization that if we could do one thing in our power and in the abortion space, to understand that they are the people who are creating the model legislation that you, like Alec, like Koch brothers, they're the ones that dropped that legislation in Texas that dropped in 26 other states that nobody knew about, to raise their elevation. And I'm a big fan when people are like, why do you talk about them? It just gives them airtime. No, if you just talk about them and don't do anything, that's airtime. If you talk about them, demonize them, marginalize them, and expose their danger, then people will pay attention, especially since their founder and head is like a big mucky mucket in Trump's Health and Human Services Department right now, right? So to me, it's like, if we could do one thing, it's really just making Americans United for Life a household name, to understand they're making the legislation that goes to those courts. So that's going to be my plug, Moji, for us.
Cool. And also just that this in no way conforms to any polling we have, right? We know what the polling shows. We know what proportion of women have sought an abortion. We know what proportion of women. I mean, these are not numbers that are congruent with the kinds of, all out bans, 15-week, 12-week. I mean, that stuff is insane. And so I think instead of saying like, wow, they whooped us again, I think the message has to be, yet again, they are completely bought and sold by a handful of organizations, and they're completely misaligned with public values. And I think we cede that ground all the time. We just don't make that argument. But I think it's not just that this is not a democratic process playing out, but that it's wildly not representative of what the American public wants, which is, by the way, how we won Obergefell, right? Like, it is how we win. But we're just not, I think, making that point that these are unbelievably extreme, and more, and this is, a thing that I think is really another thing worth watching, is that, for 20 years we had this trap law thing, right? Where we're just going to say, we don't hate women, we just want them to make better choices. Like, we'll read them these scripts and they'll make them drive back and forth for 7 appointments, and we'll have 72-hour waiting periods, and then we'll, have these ambulatory surgical units and the admitting, but all of this is just because we want them to make better choices because they're not very smart. And that was, the long-standing thing. And then you saw last year when all of those, Georgia, Ohio, boom, 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 started passing these incredibly punitive laws. Like, we're sending women to jail, we're sending their doctors to jail. In Texas, they had hearings about capital punishment for women who sought to terminate pregnancies. Like, I think it's a really useful way to say, what happened to all the talk of helping women make better choices? What happened? This was just supposed to be informed consent, and now we want to put women and their doctors in jail. Like, the whole message changed so fast that we didn't clock it. But that's the message now. Women and their doctors should go to jail. So why are we still fighting the trap laws? Like, why are we having that conversation? I feel like in some ways I'm grateful that they're at least honest, that they want to just put us all in jail.
Well, also the fact that the historical timeline that you just set up defined us as incompetent and then as evil, right? So incompetent, evil people, like, of course we got to lock them up. We don't want these people on the streets. They're useless and they're terrifying, and it's like, and it was almost like a 1-2 punch that was on purpose. First make us incompetent and then turn us into evil, so that there's no other emotional option for the public other than incarceration. Sorry, Marie, go ahead.
No, I especially appreciated how you were discussing the need to not forget about the third party individual here that is all at play, particularly in the cases that the court cases that you are drilling down on. And in thinking about that too, and especially personally for me, I think about Amy Coney Barrett, and now here, like we as a country, as a world, lost an amazing individual with Ruth Bader Ginsburg, with Judge Ginsburg. And in my opinion, that was someone who, yes, like did a beautiful job of having values, having their own religious beliefs, convictions, but they still took a non-religious perspective on the court. They were there as a moral individual, looking at the morals that those third party individuals needed. And they were a champion for that. So, but now she's gone. Now we have Amy Coney Barrett joining Gorsuch and Kavanaugh. And like, what types of fears do you have about that trinity, that unholy grouping of individuals that are really out to dismantle so much, and that we've already seen through their actions in regards to sexism, misogyny, all of that, racism? What are things that you fear about that grouping as newer judges?
Well, this is going to scare your face off, but my sort of first cut at that answer is that, believe it or not, the median justice on the court right now is either Kavanaugh or Gorsuch.
In age or in philosophy?
Median in terms of being at the center of a 4-4 court. So
Whoa.
I guess I'm just balking at the implication that Kavanaugh and Gorsuch are the problem, because Alito and Thomas are so far to their right. And like, so sit with that for a minute, like be very afraid, because the unholy trinity in some sense is, Barrett, Gorsuch, and Alito, and that's done. Right.
Can
so
we
now
pause and just have diarrhea for a minute and regroup.
No, I mean, it's really like the editorial fight we have at Slate now is, who is the real median on the court? Is the swing vote on the court? It's not John Roberts, right? He's now on the left of the court, right? Who was, by the way, in every study of the 10 most conservative people in the last 100 years, John Roberts is on that, like number 8 or 9 on that list. So that guy's now a liberal. And the median justice is either Gorsuch or Kavanaugh. So I just want to be super clear how the court has changed. When a year ago, John Roberts was the swing justice, and he is not a liberal. He is not a moderate. He is a lifelong, movement conservative Republican, Reagan Justice Department. That guy's on the left. Okay. So just to be, okay. Now to answer the question, I mean, the things that I worry about when I worry, and this again seems wonky and invisible to the naked eye, but it's super important. In her hearings, Amy Coney Barrett, this, would not say that Griswold versus Connecticut was a super precedent. It's first time, right? Gorsuch said that.
What that is?
Right. So that it's really important, because it becomes the seed from which all of the reproductive rights doctrine then flows. And, at its simplest, Griswold is a decision that predates Roe v. Wade. Believe it or not, it's the court saying a man and woman are allowed to use contraception within the bounds of their marriage. Okay, that's how conservative that was. But that becomes the germ of what becomes this sort of privacy argument, right? The penumbras, the liberty argument, that we need to be able to make fundamental decisions about, the ordering of our family lives in private. That's Griswold. It has not been a question for a very long time. When John Roberts was asked, is Griswold versus Connecticut super precedent, he said, of course it is. Everybody says, of course it is. Amy Coney Barrett would not say it. So she was not willing to put that in the bucket of things that she wouldn't disturb. And the reason that this isn't just, dorky bingo for lawyers is because that means that the kinds of things that are back on the table are not just Roe. It's way before Roe. And we know this, right? Because of some of the stuff that she signed, in her church that said that life begins at conception. We know that there are people that Donald Trump has seated on the federal appeals courts and the federal district courts who are at war with not just abortion, but contraception. We have Sarah Pitlick was one of the people who was elevated to the federal courts under Trump, whose life was like advocacy against not just reproduction, but surrogacy, IVF. Okay, so again, I think, and this goes to that myopic thing that we were talking about at the beginning, this isn't just about an abortion case at the Supreme Court. This is about the goalposts moving. So that now we're not just talking about Roe, now we're talking about contraception, and now we're talking about IVF, and we're talking about surrogacy. And that may sound hysterical on my part, and one hopes that Amy Coney Barrett is not, gunning for those things. But I really feel like if we focus only on abortion, then we are missing the ways in which the line has really moved, and that, IVF might be in play. And I think, having just talked about the polling on abortion, like the polling on IVF is not, should not be an issue, right? Like women who are ambivalent about abortion are not ambivalent about surrogacy and IVF. So I think in the sort of Handmaid's Tale that I worry about, I think that focusing too much just on abortion itself means we're leaving on the table a lot of other stuff that is in peril. So that's one fear that I have. And, Justice Kavanaugh was, in those cases of migrant teenagers at the border who were trying to get right, that Texas gave them waivers to get abortions. It was Brett Kavanaugh who wrote these horrifying Handmaid's Tale opinions saying like, oh, we have to help them make better choices. And even though the state law has said that they can terminate their, they were being locked in their shelters, unable to go procure abortions to which they were entitled. They'd been given judicial waivers. So I just think we have to be really thinking about where this starts. And I don't think it starts at Roe. That's one thing. And then I think the other thing that I really do worry about, again, we talked about this, is that you don't have to write the sentence Roe v. Wade is overturned in order for Roe to be gone. And you may never see the headline in the next 10, 15 years that says Amy Coney Barrett votes to overturn Roe. It's not going to necessarily happen that way. It's going to happen because you're going to have de facto states with one clinic, or de facto states with 0 clinics. And I know this is all the stuff that you think about all day and all night. And so in some sense, I guess this is back to my original point where when I think about what I'm most afraid of, it's not even necessarily what they will do. What they will do is what they have done, which is chip, 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 chip away at access and allow the line to move, ever earlier, and allow for more and more trap laws that make it functionally impossible for, Black and brown women and poor women and women who don't have the ability to take 4 days off work and jet across the country. Those women are going to be screwed. And there's never going to be a headline that says Roe v. Wade is overturned. And I think it's going to happen that way, which means that my fear is less of them than of us. Like, I think we have to be vigilant. And I think that if we are expecting like a carrier pigeon to come to our doors and say like, now is the time when abortion is under threat, like that happened 20 years ago. Like we got the carrier pigeon, we get it. We got to do something about it. And that's what I'm worried about. They're going to do what they're going to do. And that's why they were put on the court, by the way. That's why.
I feel like what you're saying is basically why we have this podcast and what we try to talk about all the time. And that's what our whole work Slack is about. Just like noticing that like all these situations you talked about, it's not even like these are things in the future. These are actual situations happening in this country right this minute, that where the line moves back and forth by centimeters, like week to week. Really, really fantastic, wonderful answer to that question. Trying to go a little lighter. We're at the end of the year. This is our 99th episode because this is our 99th episode and close to our end of year episode. And so we're also looking towards the future, right? Like New Year's coming in less than 3 weeks. What do you see in 2021 as opportunities for SCOTUS or even in other legislatures, judicial areas to protect and strengthen abortion care and access in this country?
It's a great question. I mean, first and foremost, I'm not hopeless. And I know I've sounded awfully grim. And I am grim only because I cannot, it's like those women with the signs, like, I cannot fucking believe we're still, like, sorry for the swearing, but like, I cannot believe that I graduated from law school in 1993 and we're still doing, like, this ridiculous. So that's the frustration that we're moving backward. I think, like, I look to states like Virginia, right? I look to states who have had massive breakthroughs in terms of protecting reproductive care. It shows you what a governor can do, right? And lieutenant governor. And so I think we are going to have to, in some ways, move the ground game to the states. And that means that in some sense it's terrible, right? It means that California and Virginia and New York are going to have robust protections that are in stark contrast to what you're going to see in Alabama and Louisiana and Georgia, and that sucks. But I don't think we give up, right, on the states. And I think now is a really good time to remind people that even in the face of the mayhem of the last couple of years, we've seen states really bolster women's rights. We've seen huge advances in telemedicine. We've seen huge advances in a whole bunch of contexts. And so I think that's what we push for, right? We push for all the things that we've seen in the states that have made it, in fact, much easier for women to have choices. And that's one thing. I think the other thing is to pay attention, like I said, to push Biden very hard to have judicial nominees who are not 72-year-old, like Admiralty law specialist white guys. You know, like a lot of those Obama judges were very, very moderate, temperate, affable fellows. And we need to really, really push. It's got to come from us. That if you want to see a judiciary that looks like America, particularly as a corrective for the judiciary of crazy that we've now seen, then that's got to come from us, because Biden's going to say, oh, you know, they're going to block them and people are going to use the blue slip and blah, blah, filibuster. Why don't I just put a bunch of moderate, you know, likable guys on the court? So that's, I think, something we do have to push for, is to really transform the federal bench and to put, like, tit for tat for every person who came up through the anti-choice movement and was a blogger and that was their life's work, anti-LGBTQ rights. We put someone on the court who is the opposite and then fight for them, right? Not kind of back off like we did with Goodwin Liu on the court or Don Johnson, but really fight for those people. And I think that means we have to care about these nominations. And then I guess the last thing is, and this really is something we can do, and you guys prove it every day, which is just message that it matters, is just tell women, like, tell your story, get in the fight, get over yourself, don't give up. We, you know, in the face of really horrible, horrible odds, can still achieve this. And I say this, look, I'm looking at Lizz's RBG and I'm holding my RBG, but like, I think in some ways, we kind of contracted this workout to her, right? Like, we bought the handbags and the, you know, votive candles and the all of the jewelry and the earrings, and then we said, good, she's going to handle this for us, so we don't have to. We can think about other stuff. And I think that when I asked myself, you know, after she died, and I was just like completely gut punched. And when I asked myself, like, what our work is, it's to, like, take the work back from her, right? And I tell a story all the time, but I interviewed her. I was so lucky I got to interview her, like, maybe a week before I saw Liz, but right before the court closed, and I got an hour with her. And all she talked about was the 14-year-old women, 17-year-old women, 18. She's done with, like, pudgy middle-aged women like me. Like, we just didn't get it done. She is looking to the future. She explains, like, when you ask her, like, why, oh my God, look at that spider. I don't know if this is in the frame. Anyway, man.
Oh, fun, it is.
See that?
Yeah, look, it's on your wall and on your art. It's amazing.
It's so weird. She would always, always, always say, like, the reason she would take a selfie with every one of those, like, tween girls who is in love with her is that they're going to change the world, like, not us. And so I just think we can't say, you know, we're sad or we're frustrated or she failed or, you know, we're losing or Barrett is going to reverse all the good. I think we have to say, whoops, we had a little bit too much magical thinking about her as a superhero. and it's on us now to finish it. And I really I'm so moved by the women who have stepped in, to do that fight, including, what you all are doing and women around the country. And so I think the thing that's going to happen in 2021 is we're going to realize, we're not having to do the Women's March, right? We don't have to express our energy in the resistance, but we have to express it in mobilizing, getting it done, holding Biden to it, holding Harris to it, building a judiciary that can do this, building an awareness that this matters, that this didn't end after Roe. I think that's all good, honorable work. And I think we're up to it.
I think we are too. Dahlia, you've been so great. I'd love to have you back. Right after Biden gets sworn in, I'd love to have you back, because a conversation I think that's really important in our work is exactly what you just said. And also, I'd love to learn about who some of these young folks are and these young justices that we should be advocating for, getting people to know and do that, and have you come on talk about that so that we can be in our circle saying, hey, these are the people that we like and these are the people that are good. So happy Hanukkah to you, my dear.
Thank you.
And have a great new year. And thank you so much for just dropping so much knowledge and education. It was really helpful. And stay safe. And I hope your family's well.
They are. Much love. Thank you for having me. Happy holidays.
Thank you.
Okay, take care.
Guys, that was amazing. Oh my God, how smart was she? How much did you learn in that? I feel like she gave me a whole new perspective on things, just impact and ways of of looking at how court decisions are made and just understanding and unpacking them. It was really fascinating. And I just felt like my synapses were snapping and firing listening to her talk.
I was so lucky to, when we were protesting at the June Medical Supreme Court in DC, I left there and flew to California to do a panel with her and spent 2 days with her. So it was so great to have left that hearing and to have her take on, she predicted so much of what she talked about before the ruling even came down. And so it was really cool to have that experience. Oh my God, I'm so glad. I know, she's so smart.
Especially, I appreciated the part where she went in on the third party, literally the person that this verdict is going to support or not affect or create, horrific ramifications for. And even thinking too about the norm, the hetero, the binary person, that individual looks for IVF, looks to all of these medical advancements that are wonderful and amazing to help cultivate a family, maintain a family, create a family. And we didn't even touch on how, or acknowledge, especially how trans communities, non-binary communities are even more in critical need of having access to this type of care, and it's care that should be covered. It shouldn't be something, that you have to have the money to access IVF and all of this. So seeing the courts also try to attack and go down those avenues and saying this is immoral, this is against our religions, what the cruelty that pushes on communities that are just looking at avenues to have a healthy family.
Well, that's essentially what she was saying. The cruelty is allowed,
the point,
not acknowledged.
No, it's the point, actually. As Adam Serwer so aptly coined. Yeah, and birth control is, IVF is specific for families, but birth control everyone benefits from, and that doesn't matter if you're cisgender, mm-hmm. non-binary, trans, queer, everybody uses birth control, everybody benefits from birth control. And to watch how, and benefits because it gives you the agency to make decisions. And that seems anathema to a power structure, right? And so my big takeaway in our own advocacy is to make sure that we are letting folks know who are not in the weeds like us, who may also maybe not as abortion forward as us also, to have them understand that your birth control is on the table. When she was on Amy Coney Barrett, did not and could not say birth control is settled law. It was that's something that we need to impart to regular folks. Mm-hmm. Right? And the fact that my terror moment was when she said John Roberts and Gorsuch and Kavanaugh were the center in this ideological court. Oh my God.
Yes, when she said that Roberts is actually left of center.
And in one of the top 10 conservatives of all time on the court. I mean,
Terrifying. It's really frightening.
Yeah, our standard for what is left is terrifying right now.
Yeah, and I think that's the battle that we're going to face in 2021 so profoundly, is how much is the power base in the Democratic Party going to try to shut us up when we actually ask for progressive policies, and with the drumbeat of, at least it's not Trump, at least it's not Trump. It's like that existing in a world where at least it's not Trump is the way that I'm supposed to live is not going to fly, right? So I'm excited to talk to her in 2021 about, who are some young, interesting people on the courts that should be, elevated to the Supreme Court. I'm excited to talk to her about a lot of things because, it's going to be interesting to see what goes through the legislative system and what ends up at the Supreme Court in 2021. And I feel like she gave us such a good overview, and it was so important considering all this court stuff just got ignored because of COVID and systemic racism and the elections, and it's all tied together. Shocking. It's all tied together. I know. So Dahlia Lithwick for the win, y'all. I know. Well, that wraps up our pod, but you know what? It cannot be said that we don't have cool merch. Marie?
Yes.
Marie?
Yes.
Oh my God,
So
look what we
incredible.
have, you guys. Merch. And we got our mugs. I know, it looks so good. You can get all that's available on our website. If you just go to aaforce.org and hit merch, it'll take you to our merch page with all of our dope merch. It's so cool. But that wraps up a pod. We are doing the year in review in all the fronts that we know, and we're doing them all video because you know what? How else do you celebrate your 99th episode except in 3 trimesters? So coming up next, we are going to be doing the year in the legislature, which is going to be incredibly stark. But to lighten it up and to warm us up is the one and only Renee Bracey Sherman, who is the Beyonce of abortion. And if you're going to talk about a lot of dark shit, you got to bring on the Beyonce of abortion, an incredible storyteller, an incredible activist, and an incredible font brain of knowledge on what's going on legislatively all around the country. So looking forward to Renee Bracey Sherman coming up on the next pod. So check our Twitter feed. And Marie, Moji, where can folks find you on the interwebs?
I'm always at Moji Locks anywhere you want to be.
Marie?
And I'm always at MConJ.
Awesome. And I am at Lizz Winstead. And our pod is at Access Force on all of it: Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube. We're going to be throwing this, of course, up on YouTube and on IGTV. We do this pod because we love to do this pod. So if you want people to know about it, if you want more Dahlia Lithwick in your life, write a review, give us 5 stars. It's the best way for folks to learn about our podcast, to reach more people, be more searchable. Again, follow us on all the socials and email us, podcast@aaforce.org. Email us. We have one troll, Brendan. We keep shouting you out, Brendan, but we have one troll who emails us. Where's the goodness? Where's the love? Let's do it. And as always, our podcast is edited by the wonderful Brad Pearson and theme song by Cory Eischen and the Purple Xperience, an incredible rendition of Princess Controversy. And we do this because we love you and we care and we want you to learn, and we do it for free. So if you want to, again, get all the info from us, pour some money in the coffers. Do it. Donate. You just go to aaforce.org/donate. Ka-ching. It's the holidays. Do it. And until we see you with Renee Bracey Sherman, may the Abortion Access Force be with you. Bye-bye.